Sorry about that. Good morning and welcome to week 5 of the history of photography. Today I want to talk about photography in the 19th century as an art form. Looking at your notes for the day, we'll talk about combination printing, Henry Peach Robinon, Adolph Braun. You can forget about Camille Sylvie. I'm going to come back to him when we get to travel photography. Lewis Carroll, Lady Clementina Hardwarden, Oscar Rejlander, Thomas Eakins, and William Grundy. Combination printing, and I'm going to show you some examples of this, is the ability to take multiple negatives and print them neatly together without a seam so they look like a single photograph. This is the world way before Photoshop. This was being done in the 1850s. The pioneer of this was Henry Peach Robinson. Henry Peach Robinson's famous photograph was fading away. We're going to see an example of this in a few minutes. He took 5 negatives and combined them into one. It was a picture of a girl who's been dying all night. The apparent father is looking out the window at the rising sun, and it was considered a very convincing photograph. He took a lot of heat for photographing a dying girl, and she was 14. She wasn't dying at all. She was just a model in his picture. There's 2 other people in there, apparently the mother and a nurse maid. He took the girl and appeared in public, and she said, "I'm alive, I'm fine, I didn't die." It was that convincing. He would take multiple negatives. He was a bit of an artist. He would draw out a diagram of what he wanted to do and how he was going to assemble his multiple photographs. When you see his photographs, you'll say to yourself, what was the big deal? He could easily just put all those people on this little lump of land and photograph them together. Why did he do that? Mostly to see if he could. So he was pioneering a new approach in photography called what we call combination printing. Adolph Braun. Adolph Braun was, as a young man, he was a pretty good artist. And he got a job working for a textile industry, designing flowers that would go onto textiles. A lot of his earliest photographs were literally of flowers, gathering the look of flowers. He would go out in the countryside and photograph flowers. He would create still lifes of flowers to lay out ideas for textiles and fabrics, and I don't know, today what we would call linoleum. He also did something else. He photographed mountains, which he loved. He'd go to the Alps and photograph these spectacular mountains, which you'll see pictures of. And he would photograph and go to museums and photograph pieces of art. Before that, to see this art, you had to go travel to Italy and see the art. But with his photographs, he is credited with bringing art history to the United States, because, this wasn't a matter of catching a flight across the Atlantic. This was, weeks on a ship and by train to museums. These photographs made it back to the United States. And so I think the earliest history books can be attributed to him. Camille Sylvie, as I said, we're going to skip until we get to travel. He was a portrait photographer. We've already skipped him for that. But his claim to fame in travel was he created a great documentation of French Algeria. He was French. And we'll see, you've already seen pictures of his studio. Lewis Carroll, his name was Charles Dodson. We already talked about him a little bit in portraiture. He was an Anglican minister, quite an intelligent guy, photographed children in the neighborhood, never married. He is said by historians to have an ambiguous, that's the word they use, relationship with young girls. I didn't want to come right out and say he was rather suspicious, but he photographed a girl in the neighborhood, Alice Liddell, and a lot of her photographs, it is from her we get the name Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So he was, he enjoyed the company of children. He never married. He photographed 3,000 pictures of children, and of those 3,000, he destroyed 2,000, which is suspicious in its own right. What motive, and these weren't just, rolls of film or, deleting your digital camera. These were sheet glass negatives, which are tedious to make and a bit of a loss to destroy. Lady Clementina Hardwarden, um, actually she was a viscountess, had 5 children, and she became interested in photography. She photographed primarily her own children. She lived in Ireland, but later moved to England, where she lived in a really nice house and photographed her daughters in the first floor. Her photographs are largely about women as women, not just portraits of her daughters, but the relationships of women to other women, uh, friendships, sisterhood. So that would be her claim to fame. Oscar Rejlander is a favorite of mine. Born in Sweden, he was something of, I don't want to say a lunatic, but a real free spirit artist. He created genuine narrative photography, storytelling photography. You'll see a number of examples of this. His claim to fame is a photograph called The Two Ways, which he assembled from about 30 negatives with about 20 people. This photograph shows an old sage in the center looking one way with 2 young men. One's going the way of the bohemian life with nude women all around him. The other's turning to the way of, uh, shall we say, Christian thinking, if I may say that. And this photograph took a lot of heat for the nudity in it. It was considered pornographic. And the story goes that it was seen by Queen Victoria of England. She looked at it and she said, "I'll buy it." And, snap your fingers twice, and Rejlander became the darling of the art community of London. So this piece it took 6 weeks to assemble this, to print this piece of this image. It's got just 2 pieces of paper in it. You'll see a diagram of it shortly. And this, if you can find one, I'll give you $50 for it. If you can find an original, is actually priceless. There's only like about 9 of these in existence. Who knows where? I don't even know where. I just know that one is at the Prince Albert Museum in England. Thomas Eakins was an American painter, and this is not unusual. He would photograph people to get the musculature correct. So he did lots of nudes so that he could get their position of the bodies exactly. So my wife's a painter, a real painter, and I know that in school they would get angles of people to photograph. In fact, I would help by shooting Polaroids of them at the time. It was a Polaroid world then. So they could get the angles correct, and they would work from that. It's called photographing scrap. He also had photographs of horses walking. By this time, film speed is getting faster, so you can actually get horses moving and they're not blurs. And so he could work his paintings from that. William Grundy was a Scottish painter, photographer, and he would photograph people in the countryside. A lot of his photographs, it was not unusual in Scotland, as you remember from Hill and Adamson, that they worked in the calotype for what they felt was the truth and the honesty of the calotype. It's a little soft. It's not as precise as the daguerreotype. And he would photograph countryside life. So I want to show you a couple of PowerPoints now. Let's start with this one, and I want to go to here, and I'm going to share, and let's watch this come to life. Perfect. 19th century art photography. This is a photograph. You don't have to know this name, but this is one of my absolute favorite photographs. Girl cutting a beam of light. So she's got a pair of scissors, and this now was done in 1886. If you look in the background, there's children with little paper hats playing, and a rather ghost-like figure of a man standing there. But this is a girl cutting a beam of light. This is, I think, his most important photograph. Sorry about that. This is actually from portraiture. Lady Elizabeth Eastlake. Lady Elizabeth Eastlake would photograph, she's not on your list, but she was nobility, and she would photograph uh, her contemporaries in Victorian England. And this is a good documentation of how people dressed then. Lady Clementina Hardwarden, she is on your list. She had 5 daughters, which she photographed a great deal. She would often pull almost most of the furniture out of the room so that it was really, there were no actual distractions and you could just look right at the subject matter. This is one of her daughters writing. 2 of her daughters at a window next to the balcony speaking. I apologize now for the low resolution of these images. I was unsuccessful getting sharper ones off the internet. Now, this was a world without electric light sources or flash. So it was, you were really dependent on window light or just going outdoors. But most of her photography was done indoors and lit by window light. Also, you can see that these are collodion negatives, hence the bad corners where the collodion didn't adhere correctly, made onto albumin prints. So this is commentary. Oh, I see the word sample in there. My apologies. Another collodion negative. You can see the damage in the corners. She would work a lot with mirrors. Also, a lot of her stuff was damaged, and hence the corners were cut. So that's not the tear of collodion. These were just, they found her prints were crinkled and damaged, and they would clean up the edge by cutting them. More use of a mirror. You know, a mirror lends itself to 2 views of the same person at 2 different angles. I know somebody who basically cloned this photograph for his own use. Don't ever do that. You know, it's one thing to be inspired, it's quite another to take somebody else's idea. Another narrative piece shot at a building. And her daughter's on a balcony. Her daughter's at a window. Her daughters were teenagers on the brink of their 20s. This is one of her very few outdoor photographs, again, of one of her daughters. Window light and the use of a mirror yet again, and the damage on the corners of the collodion neg. Adolph Braun, as I said earlier, that's Adolph Braun himself. Adolph Braun made a lot of his photography is flowers because he would use these photographs for the textile industry that he worked in Germany. So he would go out and just photograph flowers and flowers in the countryside or bring them back and create still lives. So that he had, you know, a good example to work from in making textiles. He'd also create still lives. This is a wild boar that's been hunted down. And he would photograph the countryside. Unusual at the time, he would often make sure he had a person in the picture. A lot of people wanted to photograph the mountains without a single person in it. He would photograph it with a person in the picture. So we have some people in a boat. So this, you know, I'm gonna go back one. This gives you some sense of scale. So does this, the size of the lake and the reeds in it. And he photographed the Alps, which are, and a community at the base of the Alps. So again, it gives you some scale of how big things are. Check out this mountain. I'm not sure if that's the Matterhorn or what. And way down here on the coastline of the little body of water on the left, you'll see a person. I believe that is the Matterhorn, not Disneyland. Now, he also photographed art. As I told you earlier, he would photograph, he would travel to museums and photograph art. This is a negative taken of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel where God creates Adam. And from those images would then travel to America so that art history students really launched art history in the United States through his photography. A statue that accomplishes the same thing. So more statuary for the being transported to the United States. Oscar Rejlander. By the way, 1813, don't worry about the days of life and death. It is not clear if he really was born in 1813. They didn't have good records then. This is a photograph he took. We'll see a picture of Rejlander in a bit. And he would get, it's unusual to get people smiling because people were so stiff and formal and holding their pose as long as they could. So this is narrative art. Speaking of people who are desperately poor. Now, he was a contemporary of Charles Dodson and Julia Margaret Cameron. We mentioned her in portraiture. And we'll see her again, I think, today. And this is a man's dream. If you look closely on that basket, there's little figures climbing all over it. A nude, obviously. And I will comment, really exquisite light here. Great transition of light. That is Lewis Carroll, Charles Dodson, with a piece of fabric polishing a lens. He was also a photographer. Child. Probably a calotype. Rejlander was working in the 1850s. And he did lots and lots of nudes. Now, this is called Hard Times. So this man has a family to take care of and be responsible for. But if you look closely in this one, his face also turns up in the air in that negative space above his right shoulder, as well as his wife's face. That's very hard to see, but it's there. The head of John the Baptist. Now, this is the two ways. And as you see, there's a wise old sage in the center and two young men. The one on your left is listening, and he can hear the call of the bohemian life. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 topless women over there. And on the other side, on your right, the old man's left, is the call. The young man is being drawn to the life of responsibility and reverence. Now, this is two negatives. I'll show you another picture. You can see these are all the people who were dropped in, double printed in. And you see a joint line of 2 sheets of paper. Also floating up in the air is the spirit of the mother. So up, way up in that archway, near the top, just below the draped curtain, is the spirit of the mother. And these are all the figures, or individual negatives of people who were dropped in, or double printed in. Combination printing, remember, that's what we're looking at here. Henry Peach Robinon, the inventor of combination printing. This is Little Red Riding Hood, and that's a dog, is the wolf in the bed. So he would stage these scenes to tell a story. That's what narrative really is all about. Not just portraits of families and such, but staged scenes. And this is an elderly couple at dinner. Now this is fading away. This is actually made from 5 negatives. And remember that 5 negatives for fading away. You might want to write that down because that's going to come back to you at some point, either in a midterm or the final. How many negatives went into fading away? And that girl is 14. She's not actually dying. This is a staged image. Now, this is actually made from a number of negatives. So the girl, the two people on your right are in the middle. The two people on your left are to the right of the middle. And then the two people on your left, and there's two girls on your right. Two girls on your right are on the far right, and the person on your left is in the middle there at two next to them. So this is what I mean by these negatives were then combined to make this. And this is in the diagram of how he was going to do it. How he was going to leave blank spots and feed them in. That's done partially with opaque, which is a liquid you can paint on a negative to eliminate things. We'll see an example of that shortly. Lewis Carroll. This is Charles Dodson, also known as Lewis Carroll. Sorry for the pixelated image. One of his shots, this is, I think, King Arthur rescuing a princess, children at play. Children at rest. And I think this is the family next door and all their daughters. The Liddells. A little bit of science here. He was a doctor after all. A better picture of Charles Dodson. And here he is with Alice Liddell, already a questionable image. And here's Alice Liddell again. Would you want your sister posing like that? Nude of a child. This is way over the top for me. Alice Liddell as Little Red Riding Hood. Alice again. And Alice as an impoverished person. Julia Margaret Cameron. Julia Margaret Cameron was a pre-Raphaelite. So her photography is really driven by narrative stories from the Bible or King Arthur's Table. They would use real birds' wings to create these angel scenes. That's Sir John Herschel, who was a contemporary of Julia Margaret Cameron. And he was not a photographer, but he thought of many, many things in photography. For those of you who've ever printed and you used Fixer, he thought of that. Well, you know, in the second week, we looked at cyanotype. He thought that up too. Now, while we talked about the suspicious photography of Charles Dodson, this is a child nude from the waist down. I think I mentioned before that in the 19th century, nudity in children was considered the mark of innocence. This is called Whisper of the Muse. We seem to have gone through some of this duplicate. I didn't mean for that. I apologize. Am I pushing this the right direction? I am. We seem to have a duplicates here. Please accept my apologies. Thomas John Bernardo was a wealthy man and a philanthropist. He lived in Ireland. This is Bernardo. And he set up a home for what he called destitute lads. He would take children off the street and give them an education. And he was sued 88 times because what they thought were suspicious circumstances by which he pulled kids into his institution. But he survived every lawsuit. And apparently he was quite the eloquent speaker in the courtroom. Hugh Welsh Diamond was a doctor, and he ran an institution, a sanitarium. A lot of his patients. This is a time when they thought that a person's skull shape revealed their personality, their propensity towards violence or criminal action or insanity. They felt that by photographing these faces, they could get some insight into their issue, into their problems. If you've ever read Into the Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, before the guy goes into the darkness, this is the book that Apocalypse Now is based on. Before he goes into the jungle, they measure his head to see what kind of a person would actually do this, what kind of person would actually go there. And since they never come out alive, got to measure his head now. All of these people are, I'll be polite, emotionally disturbed. He looks fine. Thomas Eakins, painter, would photograph people in various positions to get the musculature and the angles of their body for his paintings. He also photographed people in motion for exactly the same purpose of seeing how a person completes all of these activities. We'll come back to Edward Muybridge soon, who also did motion studies. This is one of Eakins' paintings. And that's John Wordsworth Longfellow. That's a very striking photograph. A girl reading with a cat on her shoulder. And that's Eakins himself. William Grundy, Scottish photographer, would photograph mostly people in the country. And like Scottish photographers, he was drawn to the calotype for the softness and what he felt was the honesty. Like Hill and Adamson, he would like the calotype. These are not the crisp images of the daguerreotype by any measure, but he would photograph people in the countryside. In everyday walks of life, fishing. A blacksmith. Women in their everyday life collecting vegetables. A man at the end of a hunt. Now, I want to put that away, and I want to open one more. Okay, I'm going to go back to share, screen share. So this is called the world, before Photoshop. That's what the world looks like without a single cloud. That would be bad news. And the dawn of fake news. So here we have 4 monks. But if you look closely at the negative, what's going on here? My apologies. Here, a fifth monk was opaqued out. Remember I mentioned opaque earlier? You can just paint out the negative and it's like they don't even exist. The sky was all white. Now, in those days, film only saw the color blue. So the sky was this washed out white. And it was extremely difficult to ever record a cloud. So it's not unusual to have a washed out white sky, since clouds are partial, since the clouds are white and therefore partially blue. My apologies, what is happening here? And blue is blue, of course. So the film could not distinguish sky from cloud. And there was lots of pictures. Now, this is an example of how the sky would have looked then, but if you get lucky and you get a good cloud negative, you can double print that in. This is another example of combination print. This is from two different negatives to make this shot. Now, here's a family with Niagara Falls behind them, and behind them over here is part of probably the St. Lawrence River near Niagara Falls. And this, you can see, is exactly, these are the same negative, and you can carefully drop into the background any negative you want. It was done all the time. This is Henry Peach Robinon, and this is one of his photographs, which he would use. He would work from several negatives to print it together. Here's another example of how he would do it. He would sketch out in advance a layout of what he wanted to achieve and feed his negatives into it. If you look closely, this whole background is like a watercolor paint with some prints in here, with real photography intermixed. And then here's a real photographic scene of the woods. So these are a mock-up, if you will, of the photograph that's going to be. And later, this is the finished print combined. All these negatives have been combined together, so this is a combination print. Here's the girl from Fading Away, and there's Fading Away again. Again, that's 5 separate negatives printed together. And this one is called She Never Told Her Love. Here's Oscar Rejlander twice. No, he did not have a twin, but he's printed him on both sides of this negative. So this is the artist behind The Two Ways. And here's The Two Ways again. Again, that's about over 20 negatives. It took 6 weeks to print with about 13 people. Now you're going to love this one. This is Abraham Lincoln. You've all seen this at some point in your life, but this is John C. Calhoun. They liked the whole photograph, but they wanted Lincoln to have this posture. They printed Lincoln's head on top of Calhoun. So this really isn't Lincoln at all. It's just the face. This is the original with John C. Calhoun. This is, if you can read the bottom, it says Grant, but if you know your Civil War history, that's not Grant at all. That's Sherman. So he's on a horseback with his troops behind him, or here's Sherman. Here's a officer on horseback. Here's the troops behind him. And here's the final composite print. So this photograph doesn't actually exist except as a composite print concocted in a darkroom. This is Wanda Woods' 1932 self-portrait, and that's her cat. And when she laid the negatives together, she got this. No, a dirigible never actually docked against the Empire State Building. I think you can safely conclude that this is a fake without being told. So this is a woman in a champagne glass having a cigarette. This is the work of William Mortensen. I actually have some of his books. If we were in class, I would be bringing books to class for you to flip through, and he would do lots of darkroom tricks in his photography. This is an editorial photograph called The Sleepwalker. This is a photograph of a man falling out of a building, and it says, a man dances in space, he's falling. And there is a better rendition of the black and white print of this man. Now, he's not going to break any bones. He's not falling that far. If you're not going to die, he might break a bone, but he's not going to die. How this was done, here on the right, his friends are going to catch him, but on the left is the blank image of a person in a bicycle. Look over here, there's a person in a bicycle in the background. So the background is the shot on the left, and the shot on the right is a picture of him falling face down into that canopy they're going to catch him with. This is Ansel Adams, and that is Moonrise over Hernandez, one of his most famous photographs. Now, over the years, he printed the sky darker and darker and darker and darker, and he was able to pull out this, gorgeous cloud pattern, but he kept the moon bright by dodging the moon. Dodging is a process of holding back the light. Photographic print paper starts out white, and everything that happens to it makes it darker. So it took a lot of light to make this all dark, but he held it back on the moon. This is what the shot looked like before he did all of that. This is a photograph of the Prime Minister of Canada, William King, and Queen Elizabeth I, the mother of Queen Elizabeth as you know her today. Now, if you've seen the King's speech, this is the stuttering king. And because he stuttered, he was a little bit embarrassing, so they retouched him out of this photograph. Now, this is one of our favorite nightmares of the 20th century, Joseph Stalin. And this guy got to be a person who knew too much. So at one point, he was eliminated and he was retouched out. I think his biggest concern is not that he was retouched out, but how he was probably eliminated in the then Soviet Union. A disturbing concept. Now, of these four guys here, Stalin, of these four guys, they're going to fall from grace one at a time. The first to go is the guy on the right. So that's a simple crop. He's out of the picture. The next to go is the guy on the left. That's a simple crop. The next guy to fall from grace is the man on the far right. That's going to take some retouching to eliminate him. You probably don't want to know Stalin. This is Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and this is Leni Riefenstahl, famous cinematographer. And apparently at the time, there was some hint that Goebbels and Riefenstahl were having an affair. So they retouched Goebbels out of the picture. If you saw this up close, it's not such a good retouch. And, a haze of him is hanging in there. The invisible art in Hollywood, when they make a movie, especially nowadays, they've got no shortage of computer wizardry they can rely on. But back in the day, they would do a thing called matte painting. Rather than, these building Rome or building these fabulous things, they would do a matte painting. If you were there when this movie was being shot, it looked like this. Look at the ceiling where all the lights are. So this chandelier is real. And the rest of this is a matte painting, which is carefully, it's photorealistic painting. And it's only a couple of feet from the actual camera, but meticulously aligned with the set behind it. So you think there's a spectacular ceiling. And then you have to stop down the aperture so it's all looking sharp. So look at this. Look at that ceiling. If you'd been there when this was being done, that's what the ceiling looked like. These people down here have light all over them, but these candelabras are insufficient. These chandeliers are insufficient to create that kind of light. So there is a painting here which is neatly aligned. So it looks like there's a ceiling up there when there isn't. Now, this is an example of how it was done in the 19th century. They would have this partially painted screen, which is partially reflective. And so this figure here looks like a ghost to the audience. Here's a really good example of a matte painting. This camera is looking down this dock or these tracks. Here's an actual matte painting, and this part's clear. So this scenery on top is the camera views from here to here to here to here, including apparently a palm tree, and it looks all photoreal, but it was a matte painting. This is the making of Frankenstein. So here's all the angry villagers, and here's a matte painting of Dr. Frankenstein's castle, and the villagers are going to go up and kill the monster. This camera here is looking through this whole painting and sees the angry villagers as well as Frankenstein's castle up there. This is from some city of antiquity. You don't really think they built all that. No, it's a painting that they will carefully align with the set in the background to look like this spectacular city. And it's quite convincing. How much of this do you think is real? There's a man on I guess this is supposed to be Istanbul, and this is the call to prayer. How much of this do you think is real? Would you believe that much? The live action is real, and the rest of this painting is a painting with a hole in it that they line up. You look through this painting to that part, and it must be neatly matched for the color scheme of the setting sun to actually blend together without any seam. This is the conclusion of Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes. And there's the Statue of Liberty. This is actually Zuma Beach in Malibu. If you've ever been there, you did not see the Statue of Liberty, of course, and nor did they borrow it. It's a matte painting. So here's where the matte painting went with the Statue of Liberty. This is King Kong, the original King Kong. And this is how it was done. They have a matte painting. So he's walking. The actual original King Kong was about 18 inches tall. And so he's walking through the jungle, past vines and past through. Here's the hole they look through. Here's the matte paintings of the jungle in front of him. And he's walking through the jungle. I remember being a little kid and thinking he was really convincing. This is the musical Oklahoma, and they're on a train singing. Now, if you've ever been on a train, they're loud, but they're singing just fine. The scenery's racing by, but in the background, we have a setting sun. This is how it was done. There's the setting sun, and here's the racing background. So about every 8 seconds, the same trees go by. The Wizard of Oz. And there's the matte painting, and here they are looking at the poisonous tulips. So this fits over this, and you can see the city in the background. This is supposed to be Rome, and all the live action is down here and over here. The matte painting looked like this. And you look through this part of the gaping hole, and you can see people milling here and Romans here. This is the movie Dave, and it's supposed to be the White House. So they found a building. This is the matte painting of the White House, which goes over a building with columns. This is the work of Jerry Ullsman. He's a favorite of mine as painters, actually as a photographer. And he photographs, this is a negative which is very high contrast, meaning that this part of the negative is jet black and the seam around this woman's body is clear and prints very dark. If he sandwiches over it, he makes one print of the the granite, and a separate print which will just burn in the contour of that woman's body. Another piece of his. So this is, simple. This is actually all a negative of water. This is all a negative of water, but he burns down this very dark. He keeps this lighter, and it looks like a cube. In this piece of his, this, this is a silhouette of a tree, and this is a white flower against a black background. The white flower against a black background has a clear negative here, and that's why it's black. And this silhouette is all clear down here, that's why it's black. You lay this negative in a glass negative carrier right on top of this, and you can easily get this print. This is another piece of his, and this is simply a series of masks done with Codolith. Codolith is, you know what it's like when you go to McDonald's or Taco Bell and the menu's above the counter and it's all backlit in different colors. That's actually a huge piece of Codolith film that they photographed the menu and they backlight it. Well, you can actually use that to control what part of your print is darker or lighter. Here's another example of his work. Now, I'm embarrassed to say this is an example of my work. We had to have a girl and butterflies coming out. This is a pickup truck with a rolling down window. And so we had to have butterflies coming out. And that's me in a previous age with sticks and earthquake wax with butterflies coming out. And we made a very convincing picture of butterflies coming out of this pickup truck. This is the work of my grandfather, Charles W. Edwards Sr., and he would take half a photograph out of him. That's my great-grandfather, Theodore Whitfield Edwards Sr., having a cigar, and he's on both sides of that print. And you may notice that the guys on the left, the guys on the right are exactly the same. This was a tricky camera my grandfather designed that takes half a picture at a time. It looks like snow, but I think it's just, maybe it is snow that was lying in the barrel. This is the best because the seam of his coat almost perfectly aligns with the front of this coat. Now I want to show you some more art, if you'll indulge me. This is done with screen wire that's neatly picked apart. So all the highlights are where wire has been removed, and all the shadow areas is where wire has been left behind. This is done with staples. So all the denser parts are many, many, many staples. That's what it looks like up close. And this next one is sculptures done with pencil. More patience than I've got. That's one of my favorites right there. Look at that. And that's the entire alphabet in pencil lead. And now let's launch ourselves into the world of Photoshop. This is the movie The Truman Show, where he built that little world under that dome, and Truman never left it. He had no idea he was the star of a show. Now, do you see those two buildings in the background? One's kind of tan, and one's like a cream color. They're only, if you look down here, only the first floor exists, and the rest is they dropped in a computer. So this is The Grinch That Stole Christmas. And the entire background is blue screen. Blue, chroma key blue is a way of dropping out the background. Now, nowadays they like to use chroma key green. So when you watch the weather report, and you'll notice that the person giving you the weather report never wears green, ever. And this isn't actually looking at the diagram of Los Angeles or Southern California, but it's looking offset and putting the hand in the right place. The person standing in front of a green screen, what they call it chroma key green. And I used to use chroma key blue. They went to green because it worked better, but every once in a while they go back to blue because if a person has blonde hair is actually really like half green. Yellow is actually half green. And in the case of the Grinch, he had to be against blue because he is green. Now this is an interesting photograph. This came out in, 2000? and 4 to humiliate John Kerry against when he was running for president against George Bush. This is actually 2 photographs neatly printed together. They were trying to humiliate him by association with Jane Fonda. This is the when O.J. Simpson was charged with murder, and Time magazine printed him really, really dark and ominously, without realizing that Newsweek was going to use the same headshot. This is his mugshot from the police, and Time magazine was taken to task for playing that race card the way they did. This is the actress from Precious. They lightened her face for Elle magazine. That's how dark she really is. This is an Indian actress. I don't know her name. They also darkened her or lightened her for the cover of a magazine. Unnecessary. She's beautiful. This is a photograph of Barack Obama when we had the oil spill, the BC oil spill in the Gulf. How would you read his body language? Is he beside himself? Like, how am I going to manage this headache? Or would you guess that he's talking to a person much shorter than him, that they neatly retouched, they neatly photoshopped out of the picture? Now, this photograph is from the Gulf War. This was done by an LA Times photographer. And this is actually 2 photographs. The photographs on the left he used because he liked the gesture of the soldier, and the photograph on the right he combined because he liked the body language of the refugee holding the child. And he put them together to make this top photograph. He was fired for doing this. Photojournalism is supposed to be sacrosanct. You can't tamper with it in any way. Now, this came out in the 2008 election of Sarah Palin in a American flag bikini. And that's the real photograph on the right. And they dropped her head in to make this happen shamelessly. This is a man from Singapore getting an award from Queen Elizabeth II, which he didn't get. And there is a man on the right, Ross Brown, who is getting that award. They simply dropped in, they simply retouched it, photoshopped a different person in that space. This is a ceremony commemorating the loss of life by the Chinese in World War II. And all they had to do was change the writing on that little stone the guy's holding. Now, I'd like you all to look at this for a minute. This is a bunch of rockets being launched by Iran. Is there something wrong with this picture? I want you to learn to look closely at pictures and tell me what you think. And since this is asynchronous, I'm going to cut to the chase. Look at the exhaust here and look at the exhaust here. They're identical, and that never happens. One of these 2 rockets is fake. Now, this is one of my favorites. CCTV is Central China Television, and this is photography where they were in the course of war games, Chinese war games, shot an enemy aircraft out of the sky. And if you look closely, the one on the right is from the movie Top Gun. Are they similar? And of course, we all believe in flying saucers. So no, I'm not running for office in 2020. Let's put that away. And I'm going to I'm going to pause this for a minute. There's a couple of 20th century artists I want to show you. Why isn't this working? Okay, Robert Park Harrison is a favorite artist of mine. Normally, I show a picture of the artist himself. That won't be necessary here because he's in all of his pictures. The philosophy of his photography is largely driven by the idea that we have neglected the world and we're coming a bit too late to help the world. He builds all these sets and photographs himself. And I think his wife actually takes the picture. This one's ingenious. In case you don't recognize this, this is from a IBM electric typewriter. I guess that's him in every single one of those boxes. I'm not really sure how this was done, to be honest, to be candid with you. Goddard's dream. Goddard was a rocket scientist who came up with a liquid-fueled rocket engine. His stuff sells for a lot of money today. This is actually a real place with steam vents in Northern California. I'll give this my biggest compliment. I wish I had thought of this photograph. Robert Oppenheimer was the mastermind of the lead of the atomic bomb. I think this was done with cotton. So he is in Chicago and he's still producing art. That's ingenious. And I'm going to do a brief stop share here. That was Park Harrison. Let's go to, we saw him. I want to look at Adam Foss. Okay, Adam Foss. Adam Foss is from Australia. What am I doing wrong here? And this is called a photogram. It is done right on top of the print paper, you know, with a flashlight overhead. Not a flashlight, but a flash exposure. And his books, yeah, these are all from his book. When his family sent him to a private school in England, and he was a lonely kid who used to go off into the woods and, you know, commune with nature as adolescent boys will. So a lot of his photography has a loneliness and an idea of nature behind it. Little rain droplets here. This would be a negative of the snake he has swimming in the water. Not sure how he did this, but it's very cool. I love it. These were done on top of a type R print paper. So it is a positive paper. It reveals the colors, not a negative. It reveals the colors as they looked. I would like to think that baby is in about 1.5 inches of warm water, but I don't really know. These are two deceased rabbits. Their entrails are all over the print paper. This photogram always makes me think of the Blair Witch Project. Now, this is how a photogram really works. Wherever the light hits, the paper starts out white, and whatever happens to it, it becomes black. It's as dark as the light that hit it. So this is a translucent child's dress. Light, it holds back some light. The whiter areas are where it held back most of the light, and outside the dress, it is very, very black. So a lot of light hit that space. Same thing here. This looks like a christening dress. Print paper can be quite large. So this is a full person. And that's Adam Fuss and his little snake friend. Gregory Colbert, all his photography is in India and Africa. Very beautiful stuff. I really don't know how much of this may be done in Photoshop. Exquisite lighting. Photographing underwater presents a lot of challenges in terms of light scattering in the water. I struggle with this. A beautiful photograph, but I struggle with the idea that he really caught that photograph in action. That's how people get killed. I think that's staged. Hyenas are famously dangerous animals, so I don't know about this one either. And that's Gregory Colbert and some of his subjects. So there's some examples of 19th and 20th century art, photography, photographic art. The names I want you to know are the names on your notes list. Also at this point, paper number 2 is due, so you'll want to be turning that in through Canvas. And I will see you next time.